I'd like to talk about the history of mostly wire drawing, but a little bit of copper and continuous casting too. This is a graph that shows when metals were first discovered. As you can see, copper was first discovered about 9,000 BC or about 11,000 years ago. We're talking about pure copper, not copper as an alloy. Gold, about 6,000 years ago. But notice, about 5,000 years ago, people were making alloys, bronze, 90% copper, and other materials. If you notice, aluminum, magnesium, and titanium are more recent metals because those are not found as pure metals, as ores, but they require electricity in order to do it, so they're more modern type of metals. Now, this is where copper was first discovered, on Cyprus. And I might add that when copper was discovered there, it was shipped to all of these countries by boats over here. In fact, the reason why copper has a symbol Cu is because in Latin, Cyprus was Ies Cuprium, the island of Cyprus. And so therefore, Cuprium was Cu, and that's how the word copper, the symbol for copper, was Cu, not Co. It's interesting, this is not a talk on religion, but if you look at the early testament of the Bible, look at all the metallurgy that's in there in 4 different areas. Copper is smelted from ore, the rocks are iron, you can dig copper out of the hills. The third one has to do with fire refining. So that was done about 3,500 years ago. People knew about fire refining and how to make copper pure. And the same thing over here. So its impurities may be melted away. Very interesting how much they knew about fire refining. So the concept then, 3,500 years ago, are pretty much the same as they are today. Now, some other historical tidbits are as follows. Obviously, when copper was first discovered, about 8,000 BC. Leonardo da Vinci, I think he's one of the greatest inventors of all time. 1495, he designed and invented a rolling mill, and if there was such a thing as patents, he'd probably be suing all the rolling people today who have designed rolling mills, which are not much different than what he actually designed them. And of course, copper became very well used in 1820 when telegraphy was first discovered. And the standards for chemistry of copper was set in 1912 by the Electrotechnical International Commission. Now up above at the top, as you've seen, I put the alchemy symbol for copper. And the symbol on the right is the symbol for woman. And the reason is, as I said, copper was discovered on the island of Cyprus, and Venus, the goddess of love, her birthplace is considered to be Cyprus. So they have identical origins, and therefore they have identical symbols. Now, continuous casting. There were some patents in the 1800s when it was first started. The first technical article on continuous casting was in 1915, as you can see, on rod continuous casting. It's interesting that the Metallurgical Society had their first symposium of continuous casting in 1944. The Wire Association had a global continuous casting symposium on copper in 2011, second one in 2015, and this year they've had a global continuous casting forum on iron. So it's interesting. The first wheel and belt continuous casting process was discovered by Precursors in 1948, and that combined casting and rolling. And that's still, the wheel and belt system is still one of the major methods for continuous casting today. So, the different types of continuous casting are as follows. 1963 was the first time the Precursors continuous casting wheel and belt system was used for making copper. 1969, the upward casting system. was first used for making oxygen-free copper. Same thing for oxygen-free copper in 1970. The twin belt system was discovered in 1974, and that is an alternate method of continuous casting. ASTM decided what the impurity levels should be in copper after almost 5,000 years, but it was 1983. So those are the major times as far as continuous casting is concerned. As far as wire drawing is concerned, the first evidence of wire was on some of the gold necklaces that the Egyptians found on their pharaoh. And evidently, it was made about 2750 before the Common Era, but that wire was not made by drawing through a die. It was made by taking sheet, cutting it into strips, and bending it into wire. Again, I told you about continuous casting in the early Testament of the Bible. There was some wire rope in the British Museum. It was made about 800 BC. Theophilus, 1000 AD. He was a Greek person, and he described a die that was used, and it's very, very similar to conical converging dies that are used today to draw wire. Emma. Now, Emma was a person, a lady in England, and in 1320 she was arrested for practicing her profession. For those of you who are golfers, she was the opposite of a slicer. But anyway, the reason I'm putting her down here is because when she was arrested, she had to write her name in a book, and she had to write the name of her father and his profession, and she wrote his name and profession. She wrote wire drawer, and that book still exists today. So because of Emma being arrested, we know that wire drawing was a regular profession as early as 1320 AD. Lubricants were first discovered in Dusseldorf in 1650, and the first lubricants were either stale beer or urine. And I don't know what the lubricant manufacturers are making today, but I'm assuming that they've improved the chemistry of those two early lubricants. And as far as the USA is concerned, there were 3 wire mills in 1834. Now, before round wire drawing like we do today, how did they do it? Well, as I said before, they hammered it to round shapes, 2750 BC. And they did strip twisting. They made ribbon, they twisted it into tubes, and they twisted about its axis, and that was to about 1000 AD. Even in the early Testament of the Bible, they knew about wire drawing. And it says they did beat the gold into thin plates and cut it into wires to work it. That's really wire drawing. And this is how they made the wire. The strips were twisted and beaten, and they were fairly round, not exactly like we make it today. And this is how it looked, a sketch of how it looked. There's a person sitting in a hole, actually on a swing, and he's drawing the wire through that die. So that was in Italy in 1540. I got a kick out of this slide. This was in the early 1900s when they were making rod in a wire and cable plant in this country. And look at the quality. The wire is dragging along the floor. Can you imagine the surface quality that they were making? But I guess surface quality was not important in those days. This is the dies that were used. The dies were made out of cast iron. They had holes in the top and bottom. This is the configuration, silicone configuration of what that die looked like. And it's basically the same geometry as dies that are made from diamonds are in use today. So let me now just give you some events. First, before the Common Era, beginning of wire making. That's 5000 BC. Copper wire made by the Egyptians. Even China, they were making it over 4,000 years ago. India, and then the Greeks started to use iron, wire rope. After the common area, grooved rolls. Interesting. That's Norwich, Connecticut, first wire factory in the U.S. A little bit lower productivity than in use today. And the AWG first started in 1858. Diamond dies. This would have probably been natural diamond dies. And resistance annealing started in 1948. Well, thank you very much.